which is,
In your bucket, apparently.
I know this is going to be an unruly group tonight, so I'll make sure I have it.
There you go.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the
July.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, wow.
July 25th, not the February 29th,
Wow. That's an old one.
2012 meeting of the Falmouth Conservation Commission. First item on the agenda is other business, and we're having, we've invited the members of the Water Quality Management Committee to be in the audience tonight because they've organized a presentation for us on inlet widening. And so we're going to have a presentation, and then we'll have some discussion about what they're proposed, what things they might want to tell us about it, and questions we might have. And then, if there's time, we'll continue to this discussion, but the maximum time for this will be about an hour. Okay? So, Eric, aren't you the chairman of the Water Quality Committee? So I'll invite you to tell us who you are,
Okay.
tell us what your committee's doing, and tell us why you're here tonight.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm Eric Turkington. I'm chairman of the Water Quality Management Committee. The town has asked us to look at the estuaries and to see how the town can meet the standards that the state is proposing to clean them up. We've looked at a whole lot of different options, and our whole thesis is we want to get the biggest bang for the buck. Whatever we can do to reduce nitrogen in each of these estuaries by the maximum amount of reduction and at the least cost is the direction we want to advise the selectmen to send the town toward. One of those ideas that has been on the table since day one is inlet widening. Not for every estuary, but for Boyne's Pond and possibly Little Pond. The Mass Estuaries Project report on both of those estuaries recommended that the town look seriously at the inlet widening option. Now, as you all know, it requires a whole lot of regulatory review at the state level and the national level, and we thought we'd start by flying it up the flagpole at the local level, and that is you. So that's why we're here tonight. We've asked John Ramsey, who worked with the Mass Estuaries Project on each of these ponds, to come here and give a brief presentation about essentially what their take is on this and the pros and the cons and the impacts, and that's why we're here.
Okay, thanks. And I'll just remind the board that one of the regulatory hurdles that this board or the town will have to face will be permits that we'll be sitting on. So just be aware of that. John.
Hi, I'm John Ramsey. For those of you who don't know me, I work for Applied Coastal Research and Engineering. And as Eric pointed out, we did the modeling for the Massachusetts Estuaries Project for these systems. We also do quite a bit of this type of restoration work on other systems as well outside the Estuaries Project. I just really wanted to first give what are you doing to me over there? I just wanted to give a quick primer. I mean, I know a lot of you guys are used to seeing quite a bit of data that comes in here regarding estuaries, but I just wanted to kind of follow up and make sure that people are on the same page when we're looking at estuaries. This is actually St. Lucie Inlet down in Florida. It's just a good example from the standpoint of looking at tides. So one of the things we see in estuaries everywhere is the offshore tide obviously is the largest, but as it comes in through an inlet, the tides get smaller and smaller as you propagate up this system. When you have these large systems like a St. Lucie Inlet in Florida, your tides get quite attenuated, get smaller, and that's those smaller curves, and it also lags in time. So that type of attenuation is very common. In Falmouth estuaries, we don't see nearly that type of attenuation as you get in some of these large systems, but it does at least give you an idea functionally of how this works. I'm going to try to be as brief as I can tonight because I really want to give you guys a chance to talk questions. The other thing that we have in Massachusetts that a lot of people don't seem to take into account is we have a wide range of tide ranges. Down in Falmouth, we're looking at 1.5 feet. Up in Cape Cod Bay, we're looking at on the order of 12 feet. And with that, the systems naturally do a lot of different things. They attenuate tides very differently. If we look, for instance, down at Great River in Wacoit Bay, one of the things you see in these types of systems, when natural systems, is you have the offshore tide and then the tide inside. That's two separate lines on that plot. Again, about 1.5 foot tide range. Those tides are right on top of each other. There really is very little attenuation because the tide range is so small, it rises very slowly, and there really is not a lot of friction in most of the natural systems. Hit it again. If we go to Buzzards Bay, where we're getting up to a 4 or 5 foot tide range, what we see in a natural system, especially these salt marsh systems, is the offshore tide is almost double what the inshore tide is. That's very common. And again, this is just the way a natural system works. And then when we get, again, all the way up to Ellisville Harbor, which would be the next one, we have like a 12-foot tide range offshore. And then you only have 2 or 3 feet within the salt marsh. So, these are the types of things that we see in natural systems. And one of the things we're always trying to do is make sure that when we're doing these types of designs and looking at things, that we're trying to mimic nature to the best we can. Some of the opportunities we have in Falmouth, I'm going to focus primarily tonight on Little Pond and Bourne's Pond, but keeping in mind as the town moves forward, we do have some other options or other opportunities. There are a lot of estuaries in Falmouth, as the most that are looked at by the Massachusetts Estuaries Project, but Salt Pond has not been done yet. Little Sipwith Marsh actually isn't even on the list because it's a marsh system. Oyster Pond is just that little embayment off of West Falmouth Harbor. It's not the oyster. We have 2 oyster ponds. But that's the one off West Falmouth, and that has a culvert that runs under the bike path, and that's quite a bit of attenuation, and that might have some possibilities in the future. But again, I'm going to focus primarily today on Little Pond and Bourne's Pond. One of the things we look at is tides. Obviously, it's a very important thing just to see how the tide's doing today versus, and that's where we get the idea of whether there's some potential fixes. If you look at the top plot, again, this is the offshore tide is in blue. We're looking at about a 1.5 foot tide range, very small tide range. But if we look at the existing Little Pond tide range, that's in black, you can see that obviously it's attenuated quite a bit. If we go to the Salt Pond tide range, which is in red on the top plot, we have almost no tide in Salt Pond right now. It exchanges very poorly. And this is one of those types of ponds where we've seen a couple places like Rushy Marsh and Barnstable where you can actually probably open up the inlet and solve all of your water quality problems just by changing flushing. Down in the bottom is Bourne's Pond. They're almost on top of each other, but not quite. It gives us some opportunity for some improvements, but there's not a huge amount there. But you see that the plots are not quite on top of each other. There's a little bit of attenuation. And if we go to the next one, I blew this up just so we could try to at least look at it. This is Green Pond, inside and outside. They're right on top of each other. There really is no opportunity here. Great Pond is the same thing. If you look at it, a lot of Wacoit Bay as well, same thing. So there's really no opportunities to improve the tidal inlets and get any better flushing out of it. So one of the things, obviously, I don't want to go into this detail, but we do develop models. We look at tides. We look at the bottom topography to come up with a model. You hit the next one. This is Pleasant Bay. This is what a model grid looks like. And what we do is we model through a whole series of time steps so we can look at velocities and tide heights at any one of these grid points all throughout the system throughout our simulation time. And the reason why I brought up Pleasant Bay, it's actually a good example of how this works in a natural system. This is actually nitrogen modeling that we do as part of the Estuaries Project. Nitrogen modeling, this is of the condition before 2007, before that breach that everybody talks about. This was what the nitrogen looked like, this tidally average nitrogen values. And if you look on the right plot, you'll see that there's an inlet about halfway up. That's the 2007 breach. So it actually improved tidal flushing and actually improved, or actually lowered the total nitrogen and improved tidal flushing. And this has actually been monitored, and actually eelgrass is coming back in that system. Just give you an idea of the type of thing that you could do. In this case, we were helped out by nature. So looking at Bourne's Pond first, again, we see what it is now. If we widen the inlet to 100 feet, which is just an example that we ran in the Estuaries Project. It was not meant as the optimized width in any way. We just wanted to run an example and show what it could potentially do. We almost get to the point where we're like Green Pond or Great Pond, where we have no attenuation. And so everybody keeps this in mind. I'll probably drop back to this, but that the Bourne's Pond inlet actually was set in its present state in the mid-1980s. So it previously was very different. Just by doing that, and it is about doubling the width of the inlet, we're looking at changing the tidal prism. Even though there's really not much attenuation, you actually get 28% more water coming in and out of the inlet, which is fairly modest. But when we look at nitrogen, just because the way nitrogen moves up and down the system, in our what we call our sentinel station, which is the station that historically had eelgrass back in the 1950s but no longer does, we actually get a reduction of about 42% above or relative to background concentrations out in Nantucket Sound. Go to the next one. And so that didn't get us to where we needed to go. So the other thing I'd like to point out is it's typically in a lot of these systems, inlet widening gets you partway there, but it doesn't get you all the way there to restoration. So what you really want to do is make sure, at least for us, to look at what additional things you'd have to do. And the town looked at a variety of, these are actually sewering areas, actually, so total sewering, if you, this is A, B, and then C, which is about north of Route 28. And so they looked at these different options and, go ahead. And going through those options, this is what the present conditions look like. Again, this is tidally averaged nitrogen conditions. And we're focused sort of on this station because this is where the upper limit of eelgrass was in the 1950s. 100-foot wide inlet by itself, we get quite a bit of improvement as you had seen before. Scenario A and B, which is just soaring, no inlet widening, we actually get, it does even more than just 100-foot wide itself, but it still doesn't meet our target. But if we do scenario A and B, which is again, it's the lower watershed sewering with the 100-foot wide inlet opening, we actually get to where our target is. And would have a nitrogen concentration that would be conducive to eelgrass restoration at that location. Jumping over to Little Pond, very similar situation, but because the tides attenuated much more, we can, and unfortunately I apologize for the colors, we can get a better tide in here, and it actually, if we even lowered the inlet a little bit more, we could actually get even more tidal flushing in here. But basically we get, instead of a 28% tidal exchange improvement, we get actually get 38% for this. And again, this is not an optimized solution, this is just an example. One thing that has come up, people have talked about concerns of erosion in Little Pond along the coastal banks. I can't really address that directly because I haven't seen the site. But one of the problems that's happened in this inlet is after the inlet was improved previously, there was a shoal that built up on the inside. And it's quite possible that the actual water elevation is actually being held up a little bit high, which is allowing waves to attack the base of some of the banks there. So again, and I'll talk about this a little later, if you are doing inlet improvements, one of the aspects that you really need to make sure you're looking at is making sure that you can maintain the inlet in the cross-section that you want to make sure you're continuing to have that tidal flushing in the future. These are just the model results, very similar to the other one existing. The 20-foot culvert does not get you where you want to go. So there was quite a bit of soaring in the watershed, the lower watershed, in order to get you where you needed to go. Again, there's quite a possibility that you could do a larger inlet here than the 20 feet, or it might not even be wider than 20 feet, but it might just be lower, that you actually could get actually better tidal flushing and a little bit more improvement. One of the reasons why we choose tidal inlets the way we do, or the sizing of the tidal inlets, is because when we look at it, we want to make sure that we're providing tidal currents that are strong enough to carry the sand through the inlet. Because you can create a 500-foot wide inlet, but the thing is it shoals up immediately. So when we run these scenarios, we're not optimizing it, but one of the things we do look at quickly is at least making sure that the tidal currents that we're creating are at least 3 feet per second to make sure, at least peak tides, to make sure that we're moving sand through the inlet. That's where it goes to this. So, there's a lot of different options, and I want to leave this on the, not really talk about this diagram, but just the concept. There's a lot of different options for optimizing. This is just showing a typical cross-section of inlet, but there's, you can do box culverts, you can do inverted culverts. There's a lot of different ways that you can do these types of systems in order to either truncate the top of the tide, truncate the bottom of the tide, do a lot of different engineering solutions to make sure that you're not exacerbating any concerns relative to flooding, et cetera. But in this case, this was for Nunquit, one of the things that happened was there was an original design down to -3 feet that, wasn't sustainable just because it was going to shoal in. And it was our recommendation to actually push it up 2 feet, and that design is actually now in permitting, but it's something that, again, we try to work with nature. We're trying to model this. We're trying to model this after a nearby salt marsh to make sure that, when we're putting this one in over in Dartmouth, that it's done in a way that mimics nature as opposed to trying to over-excavate and lead to something that we're just going to be digging out all the time. Obviously, one of the things we're here to talk about primarily is we have the benefit side, but we also have the concern side. From the benefit standpoint, I don't have detailed hard numbers on this. Some of it's done by GHD, and we've looked at it a little bit. But for Bournes Pond, we're looking at that the town could save on the order of $14 to $16 million in sewering if they went forward with some type of inlet widening at the scale that we're showing. Of course, they'd have to widen the inlet, which is an additional cost, and that would have to be weighed. But I mean, that's not an insubstantial cost, because to widen the inlet, you were looking at something on the order of 8, 10, 12 million. So it's that one's kind of a debate and would need to be looked at depending on how you did it. The one for Little Pond, a little bit different. It's about $7 million potential cost savings to the town from not having to sewer. But it would probably only cost about $1 million to put in a culvert on the order of 20 feet, because it's a very much simpler thing to do. Environmental concerns, obviously we talk about those in a minute, and I also will be talking, at least touching on, everybody seems to be, if you do create a bigger inlet, that there's a concern that you're going to be doing more dredging. So obviously talking, Wetlands Protection Act issues, at least the ones the primary ones that people have touched on, barrier beach resources, all of these, at least the ones we're talking about, all of these are in barrier beaches. So obviously it's a very sensitive resource. Sediment transport, a lot of people don't talk about that. It gets touched upon, but one of the things we want to make sure we do when we put in an inlet or modify structures in an inlet, that we're not exacerbating downdrift erosion. Salinity has come up as a concern, more for fisheries issues. We've taken a quick look at that. Coastal erosion, I guess I touched upon it when I'm talking coastal erosion. In this case, I was talking about erosion up in the ponds themselves, and of course, flooding. One of the things to point out, and people seem to forget since we haven't had a hurricane in a while, but this is the picture from the 1944 hurricane. It's the bridge at Great Pond. The bridge didn't move, but the beach did. So that beach was completely gone back in 1944. So from a flooding perspective, one of the things we tend not to look at, but if you look at the flood maps, I mean, all these barrier beaches are far underwater when we get a significant flood. So really the issue of looking at flooding is before the road's overtopped. Does this create problems as far as exacerbating flooding? And in general, what we found in the other places that we've looked and evaluated is what happens is you do get your flood tide comes in faster during a storm because you're more efficiently letting water in, but it rises basically to the same level that it would even with a smaller culvert. And then when the storm recedes, it actually more efficiently goes out. But in general, because a lot of the smaller storms that don't go over the road are northeasters, they last a while, and the water goes up and stays up in these systems if they're not efficient. So in general, we don't see, and we've evaluated this in numerous projects, we haven't seen flooding being a real problem for any of these. The biggest issue ends up being low-lying properties, but in general, low-lying properties have problems now if they're going to have problems after an inlet improvement. And obviously these are the issues sort of associated with the different barrier beach functions. Flood damage control, one of the other things to point out from a flood damage control standpoint is, and I'll talk about it a little bit, it's in the sediment transport. When we have the flood damage issue, if we have a 100-foot wide inlet or a 50-foot wide inlet, the function of the barrier beach is pretty much the same. The barrier beach, other than that area that we are putting the inlet in, is still allowed to function as a dune system barrier beach. Obviously you are taking up a certain amount of footprint in addition to what it was, but it's kind of that trade-off of improving the ecological health. So that's one of those issues that you guys are going to have to wrestle with down the road probably. And as far as a lot of the land under the ocean, land under waterways, salt marsh issues, One of the things to point out here is when you typically improve a tidal inlet, one of the things you end up doing is you end up lowering low tide. You slightly increase high tide, but you definitely have a much larger increase on lowering the low tide. And what it does is it actually makes a wider area for salt marsh to grow. So typically these projects actually expand salt marsh. And that's one of the reasons why you have, there's the Division of Ecological Restoration has been doing a lot of these projects around Massachusetts where they've actually improved tidal flushing. And one of the reasons why they do it is actually to get a better tide range and get more salt marsh. And again, I'll talk about salinity and the salt marsh, or the salt issue in just a minute. Go ahead. This is just an example. The reason why I want to point this out, this is Farm Pond. This is one of those systems that if you change it from the 4-foot culvert to a 16-foot culvert, and this is pretty much an armored shoreline, so it's really doesn't have a lot of these issues. You basically meet your TMDL. You really don't have to do any sewering, which is nice. But the main reason why I wanted to sort of point this out is there are, everybody keeps talking about a pilot project that we're working, looking towards doing a pilot project. These types of projects are being done in the state right now. They may be being called something else for a variety of reasons, but this methodology of inlet widening is being done here in Farm Pond, Rushy Marsh, Muddy Creek in Chatham, Nunquit Marsh in Dartmouth. Those are just ones that we're involved with, right now, either in some form of design or permitting. So this is, pretty much a standard way of doing these things, and as soon as the state has money to do this one, this one will go forward as well, and that's close. So looking a little bit more locally, one of the things that obviously I always try to look at, and this is actually from the MEP report if you've read it, this is something a little extra we did and looked at shoreline change, but it's very helpful in Falmouth. Falmouth has a long history of, for lack of a better way of saying it, bad coastal armoring. We made a choice back after probably the 38 and 44 hurricanes of putting in a lot of coastal engineering structures. Sometimes we paid the price for it, and some of them have actually helped. But a lot of this has to do with, once you trap sediment in one place, it usually affects somewhere else. And everybody always talks about Washburn Island, and chances are Washburn Island would be eroding pretty badly anyways, regardless of whether we put in structures. It's just a pretty low-lying barrier at the end of a littoral system, so it's not surprising. But Washburn Island obviously is very highly erosional. I do want to talk, the next slide, a little bit about the historical type stuff, and we'll return to the shoreline change. Obviously one of the things that's come out, at least some comments I had seen when the county had tried to put in that ENF, was the fact that the natural inlet systems were very different. This is from 1894. And clearly they were. I think the one thing that people should realize, obviously there's very little development, so we didn't have the nitrogen load. But the other thing is that these inlets clogged quite often. It wasn't uncommon. And so they kind of had ecological, boom and bust type systems. I guess we've made the choice, since Falmouth's gotten populated, to actually try to keep them more ecologically stable for good or bad. But that's just sort of a historical perspective. And then, looking more in a more modern perspective, we've got, if you look along the shoreline, you see a lot of areas that are pretty erosional. That's all the areas in red. The areas in blue actually are accretional. And two of the areas that I want to point out that we're looking at are actually both accretional. One in the Bournes Pond area, you've got the area where the dune was placed recently that was highly erosional, and still is highly erosional. But right around the inlet, it shows accretion. And down in this area, in Falmouth Heights area, it's accretional. And one thing that people forget is back in 1959, there was a massive beach nourishment put there. And this beach nourishment was put on Falmouth Heights after the harbor was dredged, or the entrance to the harbor. And that beach nourishment's still there. So it really has only migrated very slowly. So that beach nourishment's been there for 50 years. At the time when the beach nourishment was done, the casino was actually in the water. So, we really, have a system where, beach nourishment can work. You have, these small areas of erosion. But, even if you do beach nourishment, that material moves along here very slowly anyways, just the way the system's set up. Next. So this is from the beach management plan the town did, and I just think it's instructive for the two systems. This is Bournes Pond, looking at 1950. The inlet was much further to the west, but in the 1980s, the inlet was starting to be, around right in 1980, there was a start of the structures, or 1985. 1991, that's the whole system built. But the one thing you notice is that in the system, the beach actually built up on actually both sides of the inlet. Not surprising. You put the structures in on the west side, that's not surprising, but on the east side, you actually had a buildup of quite a bit of sand as well. This area here, which was the low-lying old inlet, was highly erosional just because it's the lowest lying area of the barrier beach. And once you close that inlet off, that area just disappeared. And just understanding that as you're moving forward and looking at that long term. The next one is Little Pond, which I find fascinating in that it used to have basically no beach. And then after the nourishment started getting there, 1975, then 1986, obviously one of the things that's happened is we've kind of created a situation where we're actually infilling the inlet because the material does bypass to a certain extent, but then gets pushed back in when there's an easterly storm. So we've actually created a problem where this fillet up here, where the sediment's moving, is actually full. And one of the thoughts down the road, and this is, again, something that's been permitted other places, is to take material from the updrift side and move it to the downdrift side. Mechanically do it, just so you're actually avoiding issues regarding the inlet clogging in the future. You can at least reduce your maintenance. Again, people are talking about velocities. When I gave a talk here back in January, people were talking that they're concerned if we alter this, we alter velocities, and we do. We alter velocities, but it's primarily limited to just the channel. This is Bourne's Pond. This is maximum tidal currents. We're up around 7-8 feet per second maximum tidal currents right in the throat of the channel. If we widen it to 100 feet, those drop. Not surprising, but they still max out at around 5 or 6 feet per second. But again, those increases are limited to really the area of the inlet. Once you get inside the system, the currents drop to a fraction of a foot per second. And then looking at salinity, another issue, very important issue regarding fisheries. This is tidally averaged salinities. We have all the information for every time step. But as you look, you can't really tell the difference between the plots. There really is, it's about a half part per thousand salinity change average between having the inlet the way it is and having the inlet 100 feet wide. The main reason for that is there really just isn't a lot of fresh water inflow coming into the system. So a very minor change in Bourne's Pond at least. Just talking about maintenance dredging, one of the critical issues here is, and again, this kind of goes back to setting up the velocity and thinking about the engineering side of things. If you engineer an inlet properly, you're going to minimize dredging. Right now, the inlets are dredged, at least Great and Green, Bourne's Pond, there's about 1,000 cubic yards per year on average dredged from those inlets. That's a pretty typical amount for these types of inlets, and I wouldn't expect it to go down, but as long as you're keeping currents somewhere in that neighborhood of over 3 feet per second, the amount of dredging is not going to change. The issue really comes down to sediment supply and making sure that you're not, like for example, on Little Pond, that you're not exacerbating things by putting in more material right next to the inlet and creating problems. And that's just Little Pond being dredged. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. I'm sure I skipped over a bunch of stuff very quickly, but I wanted to get through that.
Thanks, John. Let's open it up to the board for any questions.
I had a question.
Must have a question. Michelle, you have a question.
When you were comparing costs, you were saying that inlet widening could save the town. In one case, I think it was comparing a cost of sewering of $7 million to inlet widening of $1 million.
Right.
But when you were looking at actually meeting nitrogen targets, just doing inlet widening wouldn't get us there. You would actually need to do both.
Right, but it's a reduction of $7 million of sewering. So the sewering would be more than $7 million if you did it all by sewering.
Okay.
But so it'd be a reduction of needing an additional $7 million to sewer.
Great,
versus
thank you for that clarification.
Following, does that come from a smaller area of sewering?
That came from a smaller area of Suring, yes.
So you're taking something along the edge and that would require thawing that does not.
Right, one of the things that happens in these systems is, if you look at that, kind of that Suring area we showed where the red, yellow, blue.
Actually,
type-
John, can you put that back up? That
Sure.
might be helpful. 'Cause I had the same
When we
question.
look at that, we're talking about Suring lower watersheds versus Suring upper watersheds, and when we sewer the lower watershed, which is the area right around the ponds, that's a bigger bang for our buck. So if we sewer
What is the next one?
down in these areas, that we get, kind of a 1-for-1. But if we end up sewering up in this
Want the
area,
next slide?
He's showing that one.
that's, no, that was the right slide.
All right.
Yeah, so if we sewer up in, at least
Want the
that's,
next one?
Starting with this.
so if we sewer up in this area, what ends up happening is it goes into a stream first and gets partially attenuated. So you're not getting you basically, if you put in 2 kilograms of nitrogen, maybe 1 kilogram gets attenuated in the stream. And so you have to basically remove 2 houses up here for every house you can remove down here. So what that does, it allows us to actually focus on sewering just the lower part, where we have the dense housing.
I guess where I'm coming from, could you stay with that? The savings are at the lower end of each peninsula.
The savings are actually just not having to sewer the upper part of up in that red.
I think you should explain
Oh.
why
Can you
the
go to
lower
the
ends
next
of the
one?
peninsulas aren't sewered.
Oh, that way down here?
Hmm.
Okay, the main reason why this is sort of a town choice, you can actually sewer all the way down. You get to a certain point where the water actually goes directly into
Yeah.
Nantucket Sound. But basically, these districts were set up by the town. This is the areas they wanted to look at. It was based on, just infrastructure, where a good place to end it would be based on the different communities, and where a good place to end sewering was. This is just a scenario. It's not anything definitive. But this is what the town asked us to look at and run as part of the estuaries project. So what we looked at these areas, because again, when they're doing sewering infrastructure, they want to do, closely spaced houses, small communities, less pipe, less issues of those type. But if we improve the inlets, what we're doing is not having to sewer that red area.
Some
And if we
portion of
don't-
that red area.
Or some portion of the red area. And if we don't do the inlets, then we're gonna have to sewer some portion of that red area, north of 28, in order to meet the target. And that's where the cost savings come from.
So that's not assuming any other nitrogen removal on things like fertilizer and stormwater and that sort of thing. It's
Correct.
just solely looking at inlet versus sewering.
Correct.
And I know the other inputs maybe aren't as large as wastewater.
Right, but any sort of management of any nitrogen thing would change that mix.
Ed?
Yes, John, first, just information, you talked about Bourne Spawn increasing the inlet to 100 feet, but I didn't believe you told us what it currently is, what's the existing?
I believe it's 50 feet, it was either 45 or 50, sounds right.
Okay,
Yep.
so you're saying doubling it. Is
Yep.
that the same for Little Pond? Were you saying going to 20, is it currently 10?
It's currently 10, yes.
Okay, thank you. And let's see. As we discuss widening the inlets and the issue of flooding, particularly during major storm events, has anyone ever talked about some kind of removable barriers? In other words, having an engineering structure where you can, just like cranberry farmers, drop the boards down to flood a bog. Is
If you-
there any
if you actually look-
consideration given to having movable barriers where you could basically close off the inlets in anticipation of a major flooding event?
There are certainly, those have been looked at. Certain regulatory agencies always get concerned about towns having the authority to do that. But it certainly has been done.
We actually have it in town.
Right, we have Oyster Pond, which has a weir.
Ed, remember the thing on the bike path? The areas to the east of the bike path, and we permitted one for restoration, so it was widened, but part of that was that they could put in boards, and that wasn't so much for flooding, that was more concern about oil pollution also.
Right, okay.
But that's been permitted.
And by the
one
way, there
place in town.
actually is at least there were a series of bolts that were put into the Little Pond culvert when it was built to allow for potentially putting in boards. That was actually just to reduce the cross-section to the same size cross-section used to be in
Okay,
case
right.
people had issues.
Right.
So,
I would just suggest that might be something that could be looked at if this flooding issue,
right, certainly, and one thing to keep in mind, with a lot of these systems, there's things called self-regulating tide gates, that if the tide gets too high, that they flip down. There are mechanical systems, I'm not wild about them, just because everything mechanical fails at some point. But,
I'm sure if we all lived in the Netherlands, we'd all be very much more familiar with all of these issues and all of the different types of engineering that is available. But I guess my last issue in here, and a very important one to me, is the whole issue of salinity. I'm always surprised when I read in the paper, I think monthly they publish the data by is it the pond watchers who are measuring a lot of data on the coastal ponds? And I notice that the salinity numbers are generally up in the high 20s, whereas I guess Vineyard Sound itself is 31 parts per,
parts per thousand.
is it million or thousand?
Parts per thousand.
Parts per
Thousand.
Thousand.
Whereas the ponds are 28 and 29. I've always been surprised that the salinity is that high when the flushing appears to be somewhat inadequate.
It has much more to do with how much fresh water is coming in. If you go up to like the Merrimack River, you're going to have salinities even near the mouth of, down, especially when at high flow, you're down around 2 or 4. But we have so little fresh water, only about 2% of the water or less coming into these systems actually comes in is fresh water. So that's why, no matter what, you actually have a pretty saline system.
So if you're bringing a lot more water in, you're not going to have much of an impact on salinity, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Because it's already high.
It's already
Okay.
high.
That's
And I
very
think,
good to know. Thank you.
one great example is the oyster pond in West Falmouth. That always shocked me was, I think, that even though it just has that small culvert, I think the salinity in there is still 25.
That water rips through that culvert, though.
It does. It's whitewater rafting.
I guess,
The ducks actually like to sail on the rip, and then they go to the side and they swim back, and then they go into the rip and sail down again.
Don't give anybody any ideas.
It's not big enough for kids. Tommy?
Ed took care of it for me, thank you.
Okay, I have a question. It's clear that when you go to Bourne's Pond and you look at some of the issues of Monadnock Beach, and you look at where the road is, that used to be the road, and now it's sitting in
Water.
in the low tide area.
Yep.
That's a very active barrier beach. And how much consideration is given to what's the impact of sea level rise on the potential shape of these? And are we going to invest in a new inlet system that may be obsolete
That's,
in 25, 30 years?
I guess the sea level rise issue is always a tough one. I mean, but if you do look at the sea level rise, people have talked about all sorts of ranges that we're seeing. I've been doing a lot of work on this lately. But in the next 50 years, even the worst case scenarios really don't have a great deal of sea level rise. Even those worst case scenarios are around 8 inches in the next 50 years.
We must be looking at different worst case
Well,
scenarios.
they take off to 3 feet at 2,100, but it's always a curve with a tail that goes up. And if you look at the near term, the next 40, 50 years, it really hasn't taken off yet in all the predictions. Now, I'm not.
But it's clearly an area where it's moved back. Even if you go a little bit further and you look at the.
Right, the barrier
If you-
beaches want to,
If you
all
look at
barrier
the
beaches.
groins that are off
Right,
Washburn Island,
yep,
that are submerged off Washburn Island, this is an active area.
sure.
And we have a functioning inlet now,
Yep.
and
I guess the thing is, and this is sort of where I go back to that beach nourishment comment. I think one of the things that we forget in Falmouth, there's a lot of very active coastal areas. I work in a lot of areas in Florida and around the coast here that are very, very, very active. Falmouth is a very sustainable coastline. We have a small tide range. We have a very modest sediment transport rate. And for lack of a better way of saying it, I'm not quite sure I think we take it for granted. There's a lot of communities I could point to down in Florida who spend tens of millions of dollars every few years to keep their shoreline where it is. We spend almost nothing. And just that beach nourishment that's lasted 50 years, it's only 100,000 cubic yards. It's a very small project by national standards.
But that was an area that was not an actively eroding area.
It was at the time. I mean, if you go back and you look at and they put up groins all through there, and a lot of those groins are not buried. So there's, and I think the reason why Bourne's Pond is eroding or looks the way it does, if they'd left the inlet where it is, that area was sort of built out a little bit. But when you moved the inlet, that area became very erosional because it was very unconsolidated, loose, around the old, the inlet delta, et cetera. That area was just ripe for eroding very quickly. So a lot of that happened very soon after the project was put in place. Washburn Island, they put the groins there, but it looks like within about 5 years of putting the groins there, they were trying to stabilize that into the island, but it was way too late. By the time they put the groins in, that end of the island just took off. But you go just east of there, closer to the Mashpee end, and that area's been very stable. So it is an active area, but from
Right, and we don't know what effect a major hurricane will have on redistributing.
Oh, we know, but.
Well, we know some of the effects, but I'm
Right.
talking about redistributing sand in that littoral system.
Oh, sure. And that's the thing is, there's no doubt that, the system does have a sediment starvation problem. The stuff has been trapped because we have a lot of structures along the coast. I would say, from a standpoint of, infrastructure, I would say that the area of Surf Drive is probably the most susceptible issue where you have a very, very narrow beach fronting the road. But, it is sustainable, just because we don't have the energy. We are going to get a hurricane every once in a while. The nice thing is they pass in 3 hours, so how much damage can they do, which is kind of nice. I know they do a lot, but but at least they pass fast. They don't sit here. But yes, we're definitely overdue for one. But again, when we've had hurricanes in the past, there hasn't been a massive shoreline shift. It goes through, the water rises, it creates all sorts of damage, but things get rebuilt right where they were because the shoreline hasn't shifted, at least dramatically.
Okay, any other questions?
No.
Michelle?
You showed a graph that showed that the most of the velocity changes would be in the inlet itself and not so much within the pond. So would you expect that sediment transport within the pond itself wouldn't change that much with the inlet widening?
What you're going to see is because we're dropping the velocities a little bit, you're going to see that shoal that builds up on the inside be closer to the inlet rather than further away, which makes it probably easier to dredge from some standpoint. And on the outside, the same thing, because the velocities aren't quite as powerful, they don't push it as far offshore. And if it doesn't get pushed as far offshore, it allows the waves to move it around the inlet better, because the further it gets pushed offshore, the harder it is for waves to move it. So from that standpoint,
So in terms of the substrate further in, that's habitat for shellfish and that sort of thing, we wouldn't expect from your modeling results to see much change.
No. And as a matter of fact, I think the most of the area that's used for shellfish is actually the old flood tide delta from the old inlet. So that's still there.
Great, I just have one more comment about, you mentioned the salt marsh restoration projects, but most of the ones I'm familiar with, on the Cape at least, have been primarily because it was salt marsh that was degraded because there wasn't enough flow through a culvert.
Right.
And then when they opened it up, as the water went in, it sort of reclaimed what used to be salt marsh. It probably is underlain by a peat layer.
Right. Some of them are that way. I think originally when that program got started, they were picking the low-hanging fruit, and those were the ones they were going after. Now you're seeing more of the ones where they're actually going after fringing salt marsh. Oak Bluffs is a great example, where it really is more of a water quality improvement, but it also is a salt marsh improvement because you're getting, by getting a better tide range, you're actually increasing the size of
The area
fringing.
where you could have salt
But,
marsh.
so that's just, I guess, the higher hanging fruit now they're going at. But yes, the original projects were certainly just salt marsh. That was, usually had, a culvert this big, and, going, Sissuat Marsh we worked on,
Yeah.
and that was certainly just a salt marsh restoration for the most part.
Well, I mean, it is nice for the Cape that we are finally restoring some of those areas.
Oh, sure.
Any other questions? Court?
Intuitively, widening inlets makes a lot of sense. I mean, you've provided a good deal of documentation to bear up what I've always felt about improving water flow and therefore the quality of the water within these estuaries. And you're proposing this as an alternative to sewering. Is that the way I'm understanding this?
No, it's a supplement.
It's a supplement?
In some cases, it
Okay.
can be an alternative,
Yeah.
depending, yeah.
And I have an interesting, I'm thinking about this, and I think it's a right thing to do. The question is that right now, it's very evident because of improper flow that we're sort of fouling our own nests, and now the question is, how do we unfoul our nests? And so we open up the thing. Is there an unintended consequence by dumping all this nitrogen into the ocean along with everything else that gets thrown in there?
Everybody always asks me that.
It's called a solution to pollution is
You know,
dilution.
they always like that, but
That
I
came out in
think,
the 60s.
right, but
Or
I think
maybe
the
before that, but
the way you need to look at this is a little bit different. When we're putting in nitrogen, we're putting in, X amount of nitrogen per day. When, in the future, if we didn't do any sewering, we're still gonna put in that same amount. So if you think about the way these systems work, yes, the first 2 days that we open the system up, there's gonna be a lot of nitrogen flushing out. But after that, the same amount of nitrogen that comes in every day today is going out every day. So we're not increasing the nitrogen flow into Vineyard Sound at all.
what about all the nitrogen that's stored in the gunk that's in the bottom of those
That never
ponds?
leaves.
Well, so long as we don't wash it out.
And when that hurricane comes,
But I can't do anything with a hurricane. But again, we're not trying to increase the velocities far away from the inlet, so we're not trying to destabilize the bottom. And certainly, there is a lot of nitrogen contained in that, and that will just have to, that's something over time that's going to hopefully disappear.
Thank you.
Jen, do you have any questions? Oh, How about the audience? Any questions? Virginia,
Well, just two things. One is,
you have to tell us who you are.
Virginia Valiela, I'm a member of the Water Quality Management Committee. I didn't hear any discussion about fisheries and nurseries within the estuaries, and just if you're going down a checklist of,
We will have that discussion if you come to permit this.
okay,
I-
all right.
I can assure
And-
you.
And part of the interest of our committee in meeting with you, and we thank you for that, it is to sort of get a sense of what are the important areas that need to be addressed. The committee's in the process of hiring an engineering company to begin looking at inlet widening, and so we're all educating ourselves as we go along. So if there could be some discussion about fisheries and within the estuaries, I think the piece of information about the salinity not really being affected, to me, that was a really good piece of information that I hadn't, at least wasn't at the front of my list. So I'm just asking any comment from the Conservation Commission about fisheries and nurseries. That's my first question.
Well, I can tell you the list that I put down as John was talking, but John addressed most of them in a very general sense. But how will it affect finfish and shellfish in the area, and particularly larval stages? The dredging issue, what kinds of dredging will be required? And if it will be required inside the pond, how will that be achieved? What effect will storms have on, especially, I mean, Ed was talking about this, but if you have increased amount of water in there, and there are, I mean, we get cases, particularly in Little Pond, where people are concerned about eroding of their coastal bank. And so that's going to have to be addressed. I mean, the people who live around. And also, while all of us are in favor of increasing the amount of salt marsh as the level of water rises, you'll also have to consider that for people who live on that, that's going to be restricting that's going to be increasing certain wetland resources on their property, which will be restricting what they'll be able to do. So I suspect people on the ponds are going to be very concerned with that aspect.
Right. I think maybe just, I'm trying to think of the best way to at least, I think that tackling the dredging one is pretty, kind of a straightforward thing. One of the things that the town hasn't focused on, obviously in Bourne's Pond and Little Pond, it's hard to get dredging equipment into the inside. I know there's some dragline stuff that has been used in Little Pond historically. But that is certainly something that needs to be addressed, because I think that is one of the problems with the increased, or the newer culvert that was put in Little Pond. It pushed the shoal further in, and it was hard to reach. So I think that created some unintended consequences. So I think that certainly is something that would need to be addressed. The flooding issue, what we've typically done is we look at the height of the roadway, and you look at tides, the storm that goes right up to the edge of the roadway, and that's kind of the storm you evaluate, because once it goes over the roadway, kind of all bets are off. But that's what we've historically done for other projects. And that's, it's pretty straightforward analysis, but it's something that would certainly.
Well, I'm just saying that's something that we would be looking at.
Sure. And, the fisheries things are always a little bit more difficult to, you certainly do surveys and monitor. And we can look, you can look at current patterns and those types of things, but it's a little bit difficult to directly, generally there's going to be hopefully an improvement. And eelgrass, you're trying to get eelgrass back in the lower part of these estuaries. So, a lot of this is looked at as improvements, but certainly part of that is going to be looking at the resources that are there and evaluating those.
I was just going to say that in terms of the salt marsh, I think what he was saying is that when you open the inlet, you actually get a lower low tide, so that the salt marsh would be moving the other direction, not towards land.
Would generally be moving, correct. You're
But
going to
he
get
said
more.
slightly higher high tide.
So that's where it
Slightly
is,
higher.
right, okay.
Right, but you're looking at, in these systems, you're looking at only, about 1/10 of a foot higher. So we're looking at a very, very modest increase. So unless somebody has a very flat piece of land that happens to be overtopped right there,
Could be a problem.
it shouldn't be much.
Yeah, so those are the issues. that-
Those four that-
Yeah, I mean,
Well, then
John
the others
John
that
mentioned them,
come
but
up.
It's
I
hard-
was
it's not
jotting
getting-
them down, and then John mentioned them so I didn't ask questions about them. Because he already knows that that's something we would ask about.
Endangered species habitat, and the alteration to that is going to also be an issue.
Pardon me?
Endangered species habitat.
Endangered species.
Are there any species at all?
Well, bird nesting.
In Little Pond, no. Bourne's Pond, yes. Or the barrier
The barrier beach.
Bourne's Pond, yeah.
It's plover nesting habitat. Sir?
Hi, Ron Zweig, I'm a member of the Water Quality Management Committee as well. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the inlet widening points that were made, and to look at it more from the biological standpoint for a moment, just to bring some things to your attention. And we know that we have occasionally problems with fish kills and other aspects in the ponds, as we did this past weekend. And inlet widening is one of the factors that could help with that through the flushing, as was mentioned, reducing the nitrogen load. At the same time, though, we need to put this in the context of the time frame and how fragile our estuaries are today and what we can foresee. And the current plan for for working in that area and through remediation and attenuation of nitrogen through various means, from sewering to eco-toilets to other aspects, and permeable reactive barriers. That's something that will come into wetlands issues that maybe will eventually would definitely be brought before your committee if we were to go forward with those that remove nitrogen. But the main thing is that the plan as it stands now that we have is to 2040. And the way the calculations have been done with the models is that at the end of 2040, we will have constructed or attenuated the nitrogen in the green area here, for the most part. That's what will happen. In the report, in Chapter 6, it talks about what that means in terms of reaching the water quality standard, which is our target. And for Little Pond, Great Pond, and Bourne's Pond, just attenuating the nitrogen in that green area, and also the blue area here as well, will not reach the target nutrient loading capacity. So now we're up to 2040, and the cost of that will be a few $100 million to do that. So then we need to move after 2040 to reach the target. It would be working in this area, the red area, basically. So the thing is that in terms of conservation of the biological resources and protection, we may need to, we're working through an adaptive management plan, and it may be critical to focus on, from the standpoint of saving our estuaries, what measures need to be taken to do that specifically over time and in terms of investment. And that at the same time, we need to meet state guidelines in terms of total maximum daily loads of nitrogen and this kind of thing. So we have to move in two kind of things. We're sort of between a rock and a hard place. We have to meet the state's regulations. And we also need to, I think from the town's interest, restore these estuaries. And so that may take a different approach and implementation of various interventions to do that. So what I'm saying basically is that if we look at this time frame to 2040, we're still likely not going to be there where we need to be. And so we're going to have to go further. And in that time, the water quality may continue to degrade further. All the actions taken will improve things, but still we will have an impaired estuaries in the watershed. So this is just a viewpoint to put in context of what the plan is, where we are in terms of trying to meet the various aspects of and needs of these water bodies.
Thank you, sir.
I'm Win Monroe, also a member of the Water Quality Management Committee. I appreciate very much what I have learned tonight from John Ramsey. It's a very good presentation of the problems with inlet widening and so forth. I'd like to speak briefly to a terminological issue. We didn't name the water quality manager. It wasn't named that for nothing. We don't refer to it as the Sewering Management Committee. I think it would be a good idea to get in the habit of talking about water quality improvements through wastewater management in the estuaries, rather than simply talking about sewering all the time. In some of the estuaries, certainly we will be doing or may be doing sewering. In others of the estuaries, we probably won't. I think it's important to us that we start talking about wastewater management rather than simply sewering, and taking into account adaptive management, taking into account all of the different kinds of things we might do instead of sewering in some of these areas, or supplements to sewering to reduce the amount we do sewer.
Yeah, so reframing it as water quality improvement.
That's correct. I'd like to see that.
Yep.
I'd like to see people use that language more.
Yep, I think we're into a positive mode today.
Just one more comment.
Is it positive, John?
It's very positive.
Okay.
The one last thing, just to leave you with, is we talked about the time going to 2040 and all this in the plan. The one thing that I didn't mention, the nice thing about inlet improvements, if we do sewering or other removal, it takes time for that to propagate through the groundwater to the system. If you do an inlet improvement, the improvement's immediate. So at least when you're keeping that in mind from the positive standpoint.
Well, I'm gonna bring one other comment up, and I think this came up. Well, no, actually, it's not exactly positive, but it has to do with the fact that, and it sort of addresses what you said, Ron, is that I'm wondering, and I'm not suggesting that we do nothing, because water quality does need to be improved, but I'm wondering that the rate of the degradation of water quality has probably leveled off pretty well, because these areas, or this part of Falmouth, and the big increase in Falmouth, I've done a couple of places where we've worked, where I've looked at how many houses were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. In the 80s, so you go like this, you go like this. The 80s and 90s, it goes like this, and it's really sort of stabilized. And we know here, most of what we see in wetlands resources are redevelopments. And so for 20, 30 years, there's been nitrogen coming into these, and the system now probably has reached a more or less stable state. It's not the state we want. We heard somebody last week, a gentleman last week, who was a neighbor of an applicant, who said, I've been here, he was probably in his 80s, he said, I've lived here 50, 60 years, and I remember crabs and, fin fish and all these things that I could get, and it's not paradise anymore. Well, we all know places do change. Unfortunately for our areas, what flushed down the toilet or what's underneath the surface of the water, we've forgotten about. And now all of a sudden, the things that we used to do is in terms of fishing and swimming in clean water and not seeing sea lettuce by the side of the pond and not having these low oxygen or having these low oxygen events. We've had enough. Sure. And it's degraded the whole ecosystem. But I think we're probably pretty stable, and I think that the water quality improvements that you're working on, including wastewater treatment, innovative ways, or innovative including sewering, but different methods for wastewater, is certainly going to lead us to start improving this system. It might not get any worse on its own, but it needs a lot of help to get better. That's my positive ending. Yes?
Just make a very quick comment about that.
I can't speak for any of the other estuaries except for Walkwhite Bay. And I am one of those people who's lived on Walkwhite Bay since I was born, not quite.
So 30
and I've
years?
seen, excuse me?
30 years you've lived there.
65, I've been
You don't have to tell
I've been
us.
living on Walkwhite Bay for 65 years. My memory goes back to about 1944. And my family's been living there since 1900. I think that the last few years on Walkwhite Bay have seen in our part of the bay, a definite increase in the smells, in the level of the sediment outside of, in our end of the bay, and the level of sediment and the degree of muck and terrible stuff in the bottom of the bay. We are having every year more problem with smells, more often than we did before. My sense is that the bay has been more rapidly attenuating in the last 10 years than it did in the years before that.
But realize, adding to that, is that we've had, 7 of the last 9 years have been the hottest years in record.
That's true.
So there are additional
Global warming is
aspects.
affecting us already, and I think that you may be quite right, although from the upper watershed, the stuff we put in the water, put in the upper watershed 30 years ago is just reaching the estuaries in some cases now.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can assume that it won't get worse before it gets better.
Well, I'm not saying that that's a reason not to do anything.
Oh, no, not at all. I'm not saying that.
I'm sure, I think some people in the back, they want to speak.
Okay.
In the back.
Yep.
Hilda Menge. I have a question. Since I'm very concerned about the condition of the estuaries, I wished we could do something tomorrow. If we wanted the inlet to happen, and we started working on it tomorrow, how long would it take, do you think, to get the permit, to get everything going so that those inlets can be widened? Okay.
That is a loaded question. I think it depends on quite a few things, but when it really comes down to it, I mean, I guess what I've seen in other systems, this is not something you can do in a year. It's going to take at least probably 2 or 3 years to get through the permitting process. And right now, at least it's my understanding, the DEP is in the process of changing the regulations relative to restoration projects. So that may speed up at least one aspect of it. How much, I don't know. But again, you're not looking at something that you're going to permit tomorrow or this year. If you started right now, you go through the design phase, you're looking at, at least a year type thing, and then it'll probably be 2 years in permitting, in studies, to make sure that all the issues are addressed.
And the actual work?
The actual work would be relatively quick for Little Pond. Little Pond would be just a couple months to do the work. Bourne's Pond, it depends on what the solution ends up being, but building a bridge is, could be somewhere around a year construction. But if it's not a bridge, if it's just culverts next to the bridge, then it would be, again, 4 months maybe.
So total, we might see a 5-year span if we could start tomorrow, which we are not.
Correct. I think that's a fair timeline.
Okay, thanks, John. Any other questions? Court.
You guys have done an impressive amount of work, and this is an enormous commitment to the improvement of water quality and really environment and quality of life. And that's very impressive. But it's unfortunately more than just an environmental issue. It really goes to a matter of national and local priorities. What do we feel as a nation is important? Unfortunately, and I don't mean this as a political statement, but unfortunately it seems like our priorities in this country are going in the opposite direction. We don't want to spend money, we don't want to tax, we don't want to improve we don't want to spend money for the things that are important, whether they're environmental or anything else. In this country, no matter where you pick up the paper, we've got decaying infrastructure, roads. Look at the issues with mass transit in Boston. It's all about priorities. I wish we could snap our fingers and have the resources available to do this. The woman in the back said, how quickly? How quickly? Well, probably the permitting process will take months or a year, but there has to be the resources. And that's a matter of political will. And that has to be addressed in this country across the board.
Thank you, Courtney. Any other comments? Ed?
I have one. I sit here on a regulatory body and we do permitting, and I really cringe when I hear a lot of the discussions about taking years. You're saying 3 years to get the permits done. And I don't know why that has to be, but I can say when you come before this board, we are obligated to make a decision within 3 weeks when you make an application and when we close the hearings. And I can say that this board does move rather quickly. So when anybody in town is complaining about permitting through Conservation Commission, slowing something down, I think the facts don't support that kind of a complaint. We do move quickly, and most of the time, the only reason the permit hasn't been granted is because a lot of the work that needs to be done to prepare what needs to prepare the information to bring to us, that's where the time really comes into play. And I think quite often people move much too slowly in putting together the information that they know they have to provide to us. So the fastest way of increasing the permitting, at least in the town, is to bring it to us and we will act upon it. And that's what our track record will really demonstrate. I just want to make that very clear. I just wish that were the case for other permitting organizations at the different levels that you do have to go through, and I can't speak for them.
So you're saying we can pick it up next month?
No, John knows he has a lot of work behind him. Tommy, did you have any more comments? No. Any other comments? Virginia? Positive?
Positive, separate but related, and I'm sensitive to the fact that we're at the end of the hour. Fertilizer was mentioned just briefly. Part of what this committee is also working on is looking at some sort of fertilizer regulation, bylaw, town policy, with a target of this fall town meeting to bring something to the body politic. And so I'm just sort of informing the Conservation Commission of that and hoping that when we get through our sort of review of alternatives and options, that we could perhaps have another meeting with the Conservation Commission.
We would be happy to, we've been talking about that among ourselves, so we would be happy to review anything you have and comment on it.
And we also knew that we had a resource in Jen, that she had some information that we would fold in. So I just wanted to make sure that that was sort of on the radar screen.
What about stormwater?
Stormwater, yes. We are looking specifically at stormwater for Little Pond at this point, and again, engineering request for proposals out to, that will be the entire Little Pond watershed, not just around the estuary itself. Stormwater as a larger issue is part of the plan, but there is no specific engineering scope of work at this point for that, but that's another piece of work to be done. We will start with Little Pond, and we're going to be pretty thorough at looking at all discharges to all ponds or the estuary within that watershed. And you're interested in that.
She's a good resource on that, you know that. Yes. And we'll conclude with?
Just by way of.
With a positive comment.
Oh, they will be positive. As I referenced at the beginning, we're looking at every possible way of reducing nitrogen in this town, from sewers to eco toilets to any number of things. And the criteria for us, and it's only a recommendation to the town, is what reduces the most nitrogen at the least cost that the public will accept. And every one of these things is going to be judged on that basis, and several of them come back to you. One reason road runoff is not at the top of the list is because it does not appear to be the lowest hanging of fruit in terms of that criteria, how much it costs versus how much nitrogen you remove. Top of the list is sewering in certain places. Top of the list is the PRBs. Top of the list is fertilizer. Fertilizer, by every report we've ever seen, is the number 2 on the list of things that put nitrogen into these water bodies. So we're committed to coming back to the town meeting this fall with an agenda on fertilizer, whether it could be a regulation from this board in your 100-foot buffer. It could be a policy decision by the selectmen about what the town itself would do. It could be a bylaw that covers the whole town, or at least the estuaries, areas of contribution. Those are the 3 areas that we're looking at as the most immediate targets. But we're thinking this fall, town meeting, which means we're thinking September for an article. So this is not something that we're going to dally on. We'll have something for you and with you. Ed's already been contributing mightily to our list of ideas, and we appreciate it. But we'll have something for you within a month.
Good. Thanks. Well, thank you all very much for coming.
Just one thing, Madam Chair. I do hope we would have the discussion on fertilizer very quickly, perhaps in the next couple of weeks. I was prepared to speak to that tonight, but of course time has run out. I did have some suggestions. Actually, I really do think that this commission can and should, we have the authority, and we should, I think, consider an outright ban in our regulations to support protecting the resources, which is our authority we have, that we couldn't put a ban on any kind of fertilizer within, I'm going to suggest, 25 feet of any water body, and that would also include a ban on any lawns within 25 feet. A lot of our permits do require mitigation, and we always want that mitigation adjacent to the water, so a lot of the permits we issue do not have lawn next to the water, but I think we ought to make it a real regulation of 25 feet. That's work for us to do, but I would suggest to the Water Quality Management Committee that we can probably not go further than what I'm talking about. And that is because even though we do have the power to regulate fertilizers, I do believe when one has the power, you have to exercise it with great discretion. And it would be a big mistake for the Conservation Commission, I believe, to take on the whole project of trying to get a bylaw through the town. But I think it's something that can work and will work, and I think there is a lot of town-wide support if we get everybody working on it, and therefore I wanted to suggest perhaps there's room for some kind of a subcommittee to work on this bylaw for town meeting, and that would include a lot of people from different committees in town, maybe somebody from Concom, and I would hope I might get appointed to be the Concom rep, but I would suggest also a rep from FACES, the Coastal Ponds Committee, if it's still active, maybe the 300 Committee, which
Still
I
active,
think
but
carries a
I'm
lot
not
of
on
weight in town, is highly respected. Your own committee, I would suggest also maybe a member of the Board of Selectmen, and because there's a lot of regulatory issues involved, maybe Assistant Town Council is part of that working committee too, or at least standing by to advise. Because maybe the first thing I would suggest in what I sent to you on what's happening in Sanibel Island, Florida, is a nice document, and I think they've done a lot of the work for us, but maybe the first things I would do if I had the authority was to turn this over to Town Council and ask the question, this is Florida. What is it in this particular document, these regulations in Florida, that we could not do here in the state of Massachusetts? I'd like to know that right before I got going. Once I know that, then I would say, how much of this do we want to adapt, and what changes will we make, and is what would we add? And a lot of the work's been done for us. But I think there are also some other regulations in other jurisdictions that we should be taking a look at quickly.
Okay.
Amen.
Thanks, Ed. We look forward to seeing you again. Okay. Perhaps to talk about fertilizer next. And we're going to move right on to, everybody listening on the board? Do I have your attention? All right. Request for mediation for 120 Racing Beach Avenue.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the applicant has requested a continuance till August 8th.
So move.
Second.
Any questions on the board? Any questions from the audience? Okay, hearing none. Motion on the table is a continuance on this request for mediation to August 8th. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Minutes, we're going to wait until the end of the meeting. Could we have a continuance to the end of the meeting? For a-
Table.
What's it called? Table.
Table.
I move to table minutes of 7:11 and 7:18 until later in this meeting.
Thanks, Ed.
Second?
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Request to continue under determination of applicability. Elaine and Paul Griffel, 10 Rawson Street and Rawson Street, map 4600S00000D, East Falmouth, for permission to remove branches overhanging the roof of the house and to replace weed area with grass and to trim trees across the street to a lower level than the wires.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the applicant has requested a continuance until August 8th.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions on the board? Any questions from the audience? Okay, all in favor of the motion on the table, which is a continuance to August 8th, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved. Request for a determination of applicability. Lockstead Association, care of Susan Nelson, Lot 178, Coonamessett Circle, map 1701009178, Hatchville, for permission to deposit sand, 4 inches of sand, over approximately a 30-foot by 50-foot area landward of Coonamessett Pond in existing sand and grass area.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the staff is recommending a -2 under the bylaw, -3 under the state with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So move.
Second.
Any questions on the board? Any questions from the audience? Okay, all in favor of the motion on the table, which is to accept staff's recommendation of a negative determination, which means they can go ahead with their proposed project. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved. Elaine and Paul Griffel has just been continued to August 8th. Virginia Lee Baghdadi, 20 Cohog Pond Road, West Falmouth, for permission to create a 25-foot wide vista view and to cut a 4-foot path to the pond.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the applicant's requesting a continuance until August 8th.
So move.
Second.
Any questions? Anywhere?
I just think August 8th is going to be a busy evening.
Well, who knows, maybe there'll be a second
We've got quite a few
continuance.
NOIs tonight.
Yep, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved. Continued request for determination of applicability. Marlene Belfort, 3 Main Entryway, North Falmouth, for after-the-fact permission to allow the existing driveway.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the staff is recommending a -2 under the statement bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So move.
Second.
Any, we have some people participating down here, so, but you got it for now. But they'll speak up quicker next time. We have a motion and a second on the table. Any questions?
Just one.
Okay?
I've never seen an RDA for an after-the-fact permission. I'm wondering why the subject even came up. Well, what can you tell us about this, Jennifer? I'm just curious.
It's just a new gravel driveway. We thought there might be an isolated wetland on the property. Went and checked it out. There was a lot of disturbance on that site, a lot of fill. We brought in John Rockwell from the
Buzzards Bay.
Buzzards Bay National Estuary Program to help us out with the delineation, and we determined it wasn't a wetland, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all in favor of the motion?
So actually, we're not really giving after-fact permission. They don't need permission, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Could I address that?
If you like.
Do you want to address it?
About
Well,
that.
just to clarify, it's work within a
We're
flood
gonna-
zone, that's all.
It's work within what? A flood zone?
So
Oh,
it's still in the resource.
It's work within, so it's
Oh, okay.
work within a resource area. Okay, motion on the table is to accept staff's recommendation of a negative determination. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved. Rebecca Garland, 42 Chase Road, West Falmouth, for permission to vista prune.
Did you skip
Ron,
one?
Oh,
Cunha.
I skipped one. I just checked them right off. Rob Kuna, 21 T-Ticket Path, East Falmouth, for permission to install a new Title V sewage disposal system to remove the existing cobblestone retaining walls and paved surface and match grades on either side of the driveway.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the applicant's requesting a continuance until August 8th.
So move.
Second.
Okay,
That
any
gives you
questions?
a total of 3 continued RDAs for the 8th and 1 new RDA for the 8th.
So it's still
Yeah,
not that
so
many.
that's normal.
I'm just
Yeah.
remembering, though, that we have a few continuances
You have,
and some new
you have
NOIs
quite a
also.
few notices and quite a few continuances.
Right.
Well, we'll have a good time on the 8th. All in favor of the motion on the table, which is a continuance to August 8th? All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved. Rebecca Garland, 42, we're back to Rebecca, 42 Chase Road, West Falmouth, for permission to vista prune.
Yes, Madam Chairman, we are recommending a -2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So move.
Second.
Good job.
Gotcha.
All right. Okay, any questions? The motion on the table is for a continuance to, is
No, this is
to
a
accept
negative.
staff's recommendation of a negative determination. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved. Okay, other business, request for remediation, we've continued that to August 8th. Vote orders of condition,
Madam Chairman, one quick thing, under other business, I have one quick thing.
one other business.
Yep. Holmes and McGrath is requesting a site visit with the board at 25 Barneck Road to review a RDA that has been continued. So I need to know the board's availability, possibly next week.
This is for an RDA.
Yep, if you would email me your availability to meet out in Woods Hole at any point next week, that would be helpful.
Well,
Okay?
right at this point, you could schedule it at any time for me, except Yeah, no, actually, I have a couple of meetings.
Okay, so I'll
So-
send you guys an email out
For
tomorrow.
myself, only Monday or Tuesday. I'm very busy later in the
Okay.
week.
Okay, well, well, yeah, you can, if we had it Monday, you'd have to advertise
Can't do
tomorrow,
it
wouldn't you?
Monday, it would have to be Tuesday, and Tuesday's not a good day for me, so it'll be later in the week.
Why don't we tentatively schedule it for Thursday at some point? And that way, people can, I mean, if you just leave it open, everybody's gonna have a day. You put a day on it, we'll find out.
Yeah, I could do it anytime Thursday. What,
Thursday's good for me.
should
That would be
we,
the second.
well, you're not gonna be here.
Well, there's several people that aren't here
okay.
tonight.
Well, I know there's people who aren't here tonight, but they're gonna, and actually, two of the people
Tommy,
who aren't
could
here
you do
tonight
that?
are
It's a site you saw us in
Three of-
front of
three
the
of
other
them.
day.
Closed.
work late.
I
So-
can go.
Okay.
I'm always closed there.
Mike?
I think so, second, yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll tentatively schedule it for Thursday and let you guys, send you guys an email.
Okay, and maybe sort of later in the day for the people who.
Yeah. I can do it at
Yeah.
like 3 o'clock.
Okay. Okay, vote orders of conditions.
Just to let you know before you go through them, Madam Chairman, the first three, we don't have a quorum because Maury and Tom are not here. So we're gonna have to actually schedule a morning meeting or a meeting before next Wednesday to vote those.
Okay,
I was unaware that Maury wasn't gonna be here, and Tom called this morning and could not make it tonight.
right. Okay, so what I suggest is, let's return back to those at the end, so if any of us are
Okay.
on those quorums, we can
Okay.
deal with that. Mr. Gordon, isn't that you in the back?
It is, hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Why don't we go to Mr. Gordon's project?
Sure.
So he can go home. If he'd like, he doesn't have his daughter here to take her to dinner,
I
but,
thought I'd seen it on TV, is it 12 West End?
Yes.
Okay, I was confused by the water quality, because it was just focused in on that picture, and I didn't see the board, and I wasn't sure if that was the Continental meeting or
oh,
something else.
it was. So you got to hear another meeting. Okay, we're all on this quorum, right? We were all here last week?
Yes,
Okay, 120 Racing Beach Trust, care of Edward Gordon, 120 Racing Beach Avenue, Falmouth. Jen, this is an amendment to an existing order.
Yes, Madam Chairman, you saw the amendment last week. It was for the installation of a retaining wall and regrading of the back property. I think the first time the board heard the request for amendment, you were just unsure of what the exact word was going to be. I think the focus of the discussion revolved around
Sorry about that.
how the grading was going to go, and then what was going to go in front of that wall.
I mean, seaward of the world.
Seaward of the wall. The board had
Yeah, that's a good
discussed a
point.
special
We've
condition.
been caught on that.
The board had discussed a special condition of requiring staff to review a planting plan prior to that, because right now the plan calls for lawn in front of the wall.
Right, and the applicant would like to have something, but low growing.
The applicant would
Native-
like to have,
Native vegetation, but low growing.
I think the board needs to consider the fact if the applicant wants to put ornamentals too. What does the board want? They want something that's low, they don't want anything that goes above the height of the wall. You seem to be all in agreement of that. If you require mitigation plantings in front of that wall, are you going to give a,
Seaward, you mean?
seaward of the wall? What are you gonna do about the mitigations required for the project itself? Is that a trade-off or not? Because the mitigation plantings seaward of the wall were never put on the plan. See where I'm going?
They weren't put on the plan, but they were supposed to be there?
No, you asked for them because they just had grass in front of the wall. And you said you would
Well,
prefer
these
to
aren't
see something.
these aren't
They're not
mitigation
mitigation.
planning.
Yeah,
These are plantings, but they're
So-
plantings within our jurisdiction.
They are
and I'd like
plantings
them-
within your
And I'd like to see them be, I mean, if they were right by the house, I wouldn't mind seeing ornamental, but at this
Okay.
place, I'd like to see low-growing woody
Natives.
natives.
Okay.
That's seaward of the wall.
That's
Seaward of the wall.
Now, we do have an approved plant list, correct? That
Yeah,
could
and
be-
Jen can pick
Yes.
from that.
It's available. and
There's,
pick and choose from it.
The plant list can be, there are a number of other native species
That, in addition to what's on the plant
that
list.
are, in addition to
So-
what's on our plant list, that would be appropriate for many areas in town, they just are not on your list.
Well, they should be then.
Yes, they are, and that is a discussion that the staff is having with each other. There are a number of plants that I particularly, anyway, won't go there. So,
Okay.
that I think was this big, issue that you were looking at once you were all, more comfortable with. what
Yeah,
the
I'd just make a
intention was
finding
going to
that,
be.
that the modification is within the scope of the whole
Right.
project.
So that's if the applicant chooses to put shrubs. Correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
And, you know, clarify that we agreed that they would be low-growing because
Yeah.
it's in place of low-growing that take minimal maintenance.
Well,
That's
low defined, and low is defined as
Below
the
the
height of the wall.
Below the height of the wall.
Below the
Yeah.
height of the wall, but you're not requiring them. They can keep the grass there if they choose.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, is that a good idea? I don't like that.
Well, they can keep, that's what they had. I don't
That's
mind
what
if
they
they keep
had.
it, but,
We
you know,
can't
it's
require-
Falmouth friendly lawn.
It's not mitigation, so
It's not required. You were bantering around the idea of having plants there, and that's what opened up that discussion.
Plants other than grass.
Plants other than grass. So if the
I guess
applicant were to
I'll be
choose to.
consistent with my earlier feelings in
Oh,
a discussion
absolutely.
earlier tonight, that we should not be
I understand that.
encouraging, or we should have a regulation
Well, we don't.
eliminating any kind of lawn within 25 foot of a resource area. We don't have that regulation.
No, we don't.
At the present time, so that wouldn't apply, but I really think we should be getting there very quickly. Can we put that on our agenda very soon? For a discussion of
Put it on the
the
8th.
modification to the buffer regulations? It can be like a one-sentence modification to the buffer, or 2 sentences.
It's gonna take.
We would have to have hearings on that, and we will, but I think we need to get going on that.
Okay.
I would like to propose something. I would like to give an alternative to the woody vegetation.
Sure.
And that, since there was gonna be a lawn, another option
native grass.
would be native grass that includes, you know, butterfly attracting bushes or something like that.
Native grasses, sure.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be shrubby.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, there any other discussion? I'm gonna turn to the gentleman here and ask for a motion that people want to put on the table.
Why don't you go ahead, Charlie? Make a motion.
Motion to move?
You move, you're gonna make a motion to accept the order as discussed.
I make a motion to accept the orders discussed.
Second.
Good job. Okay, motion on the table is to accept the order as discussed. All in favor?
Actually, the amendment, isn't it, as
Yeah,
discussed?
amendment, yeah. That's all right.
Well, the amendment to the order is
Right.
discussed. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved.
Could you just explain to me what it was, the condition actually? I wasn't there.
Okay, so the area where you were gonna have grass,
Yeah,
you don't have to, I mean, we would prefer you didn't plant grass,
yeah.
but
You probably would,
you can
too,
plant
right?
something native. It could be native grasses.
So if I'm gonna plant anything other than grass, it needs to be native? Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying?
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
Native grasses, native low-growing shrubs that don't extend above the height of the wall.
Does that mean that if we plant something that's meant to be low, but it happens to come above the wall, that we can maintain it to the height of the wall?
Yeah, you can maintain it,
Yes.
because that was the agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, and should that be explicit in,
I'll
Yeah.
put that in.
So,
Yeah,
just one
if you
quick, and if we do plant native, that becomes I know it's not specifically ordered mitigation, but doesn't that eats up mitigation area
It does, but it's not a very big area.
of 500 square feet?
No, but it could be credited towards future, if it's not mitigation now.
Well, that's what I was, because we offered mitigation, if you recall, in compensation for the wall, and if we do end up planting something
All right,
new,
well,
we get a
Jen,
credit.
say that this is a credit.
If it's planted.
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to Ellen Clements, 259 Lakeshore Drive, East Falmouth.
Oh, we're going back up there? Okay, Madam Chairman, this was the small
Is
addition
there a
on.
quorum?
We need the quorum.
Yeah, you have the quorum for
Because
this.
I don't think I'm on it.
We
The
do.
only one you don't have a quorum for is the first three.
No, but I don't
Wait,
know that
you
I'm
have
on
to
it.
tell us
Oh, I'm
who-
sorry,
who's
Michelle.
on it. It must be,
Oh, it's Mike,
Ed,
Betsy,
Mike,
Ed, and
Betsy, and
Courtney.
Courtney.
Sorry about that.
yep.
This is Clements?
Yes,
Oh, this is Matt's project?
yes. And basically, the only real special condition, in addition to your normal special conditions, is that they're gonna have to consult with staff prior to planting, because Matt put his plan into you prior to when I met with Ms. Clements out there.
Right, and we
It's in the
discussed that.
same general area.
Right,
There's not that much difference between where Mr. Costa put the mitigation plantings on the plans and where Ms. Clements and I discussed it in the field.
right.
I understand her desire to have that one little flat area on her property, and this does extend towards the wetland, and it's closer to the wetland, and
Yep,
so I'm fine with that.
okay.
I'll move that we accept the order on Clements as discussed and presented by the administrator.
Second?
Okay, any questions? Okay, all in favor of the motion on the table, which is to issue an order of conditions to Ellen Clements, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Well, since we all voted unanimous, so moved. Joseph Melnick, 167 Great Bay Street, East Falmouth. This was Matt's also.
No.
Yes, and this is the one, it's Mike,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Betsy,
okay.
Ed, and Courtney again, and it's the one where the mitigation plantings were
Out-
originally proposed within the town road layout, and they moved them.
back.
It's a very small project, they don't
Yep.
have a lot of mitigation, but now they're on the property.
Yep.
And instead of in the town road layout, so it's
I move
basically
to
a
accept
straight.
the order of conditions as proposed by the administrator.
Second?
Okay. Mike, since we have it moved in a second, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay.
Yeah, I was
Oh.
happy with the change.
Okay, all in favor of the motion on the table, say aye.
Aye.
The change
All-
too.
We were all happy with the change. All opposed? Unanimous, so moved.
We are in a good mood tonight.
We are. Daryl and, we're going to be out of here by 9. Daryl and Janice Cugini, 35 Charles River Road.
That quorum is. We don't have a quorum for that one, I'm sorry.
Okay, who's on it?
Mike, Maury, Betsy, Tom, and Ed. I need Tom and Maury, is what I do.
Yeah, but we need to know which of the rest of us you need.
Um,
Mike, Maury, Betsy,
Tom, Ed.
You don't need me.
Ed, but Ed's not going to be here after
After
Tuesday.
I can be here Tuesday, but that's.
Yeah, which
no
would
later.
mean we'd have to do it, should have to advertise tomorrow.
Right.
So that's,
So why don't I put, I mean, it seems
I mean, I
like
guess in a
7
pinch, if it was like real early, like 7 AM.
Well,
yeah,
I
but
might be
let's
able to
not,
do it.
yeah, let's not make you have to do that if,
no, we're not gonna
We
do
don't
that
have
to
to.
you. We'll do it Tuesday. We'll post it, as long as I can get a public meeting posted tomorrow. You guys will be good for Tuesday, because I need 48 hours of.
I mean, I'm thinking
business
early
days.
Tuesday though, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
so,
So-
how about Abby's Lane?
Abby's Lane, 537 West Falmouth Highway, Quistit Boatyard, And.
I need to know the quorums.
Oh. Abby's Lane is Courtney, Michelle, Ed, Tom, and Maury. So Courtney, I do need you, and I heard that swear word right now that you muttered under your breath.
Okay,
The
Mark,
only one that gets out is Michelle.
Mark, and, well, not necessarily. Mark, she gets out of that one, but we'll see. Mark and Arlene Lowenstein.
Same one, Tom, Courtney,
Okay.
Ed, Michelle, and Maury.
And Quissit Boatyard,
Ed, Courtney, Tom, and Maury. So basically, I need Betsy, Ed, Mike, Tom, Maury, and Courtney. You're good, and Tom.
At
Tommy,
least
you're
you need,
good.
you need 4 of us.
And you're gonna do this, what,
No, I
Tuesday
need
morning?
all of you because
Oh,
you
well,
all
right,
shift.
right.
I need-
Tuesday morning at 7
Yeah,
a.m.
I need Tom, Maury, Ed, Mike, Betsy, and
Michelle's the
Courtney.
only one who gets,
Michelle
Tommy.
and Tommy are the only ones that get a
and Tommy.
pass.
Well, Tommy, your
And
time will
Arthur,
come.
because apparently Arthur's not in any of these.
In fact,
quorums.
in fact, when your time comes, last person on the board brings coffee and donuts to the 7 o'clock meeting.
Okay.
We'll
Quorum
remind
on
you.
that?
What?
Do we have a quorum on that?
Oh, absolutely. It's a long-establised policy here.
Yes.
I think that
Unfortunately,
means I
7
bring
o'clock
coffee
meetings
and
are
donuts,
necessary
Tuesday,
sometimes
doesn't it?
because of that.
So Tuesday, 7 a.m. is going to interfere with my Tuesday track workout.
No, I am
And your
terribly
Tuesday.
sorry.
Oh,
It's gonna
darn.
interfere with my sleep.
Darn. Okay,
You have to go into executive session, so I'm gonna post a public meeting.
What about minutes?
Tuesday, oh, thank you, Michelle. Tuesday at 7 o'clock? Yeah, because Tom's gonna want 7, he's not gonna want 7:30.
okay.
Motion to untable minutes?
Oh, yeah, we have to do that first.
And
Second.
she skipped one.
Sorry, but I didn't, I was.
All
I
in
was waiting.
favor of on-tabling minutes?
Favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Everybody's in favor of on-tabling minutes. Jen, would you like to discuss this?
Yeah, first of all, when she revised the agenda to put these minutes on, she left one off. So we're gonna have to put 6:27 back on next week
Okay,
for the 8th.
okay,
Um,
next week. And what's the story about 7-11 and 7-18?
I didn't see
I've
7:18.
done 7-11, I don't have 7-18.
But Jen has a question
No,
on
no, 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 7-11.
7-11 is where you have the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And I
I'll
wasn't here.
78 Chase Road, you guys, look at the part of the minutes on the 7-11 one.
I wasn't here.
Oh, you weren't here, neither was
was
I.
not.
We don't have a quorum.
It's okay, we can vote them, we can vote them next week. I just need, we're trying to get a letter out, and Courtney, 1 minute, please. We're trying to get a letter out to the applicant on 78 Chase Road, Ed, Michelle, Courtney. Remember that? Jack Lander's colleague came in, and we did not vote for the certificate of compliance.
Right.
That's all I need to know. So we'll do those minutes next week.
Okay, let's do.
Because the minutes reflect that we did vote for the certificate
no.
of compliance.
We definitely did not.
The wording was not clear.
Yeah, but, no, the wording's not clear in the minutes. Are those the minutes right there, Courtney?
Yeah, I've
Okay,
got
let
them
me
all
see.
marked up, I'm
All
ready to
right.
vote them.
Courtney's ready
We
to vote
can't,
them,
we don't have
so-
quorum.
You don't have a quorum to vote them.
Because they,
You weren't
Only
on
3
yet,
of
were
us,
you,
yeah.
Tommy? Tommy wasn't on yet.
Tommy was not on.
yeah,
Courtney,
the
save this
issue,
for
the
next
issue is that the way those minutes were written
Yeah. it's just
was
unclear.
that it states that there was a
Courtney, we don't
motion.
need, we don't need to discuss this till next week.
We don't have a quorum, Courtney. We can't discuss it, we can't vote it. I'll talk to Susan about it. Okay, now let's go into executive session.
Okay, do we need to,
You have to do a roll call vote.
I know what I need to do. Don't you need to talk to the people in the,
Yeah.
All right.
Do it right now.
all right, I'm gonna have Michelle make a motion that we go into executive session for the purpose of, to discuss strategy with respect to pending litigation on 42 Squibnocket Turner, because an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the commission. And after we're finished with executive session, we're gonna roll right into adjournment.
Excellent, so moved.
All right.
Second.
Okay, got that, Susan?
No, but, all right. So
All right.
we need a roll call vote.
So now we're gonna go roll call, and we're gonna start with Tommy.
Both aye.
Schmidt, aye?
Powers, aye.
Gladfelter, aye.
West End.
Bird eye.